Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock and I'm Michelle Dewberry. Coming up tonight, we will look back on a momentous day today where we, GB News presenters, headed off to the streets, the steps of Downing Street for you to help try and rally government to see sense and try and urge them to stop people refusing to accept cash in this country. And today, a big day for A-level students. Results are in. I have to say that the Education Secretary says that in 10 years' time, nobody will even care what your results were. Is she right? I'm asking, how important are qualifications when it comes to life generally? Of course, if you're going to be a brain surgeon, I get it. But more generally in life, useful, necessary or not? And did you know in this country, over 10 million people spend their time caring for for loved ones. There's now people saying that these folks should effectively receive a salary for doing so. Do you agree with that? And Rishi Sunak has been accused of rolling out the red carpet. Why? Because apparently he's inviting the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to visit the UK. What do you make to this? Should we be welcoming the leader of a country with, let's face it, a pretty diabolical human rights record? Or is all fair when it comes to trade and international relations? We've got it all to come and more. But before we get into it, let's bring ourselves up to speed, shall we, with the latest headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Michelle, thank you. Good evening. Well, tributes are being paid to the legendary broadcaster Sir Michael Parkinson, who's died after a short illness at the age of 88. Sir Michael became one of the country's most famous faces through his long-running TV talk show, interviewing some of the world's biggest stars, including Muhammad Ali and Billy Connolly. The comedian Stephen Fry described him as an authentic genius and said it had been impossibly thrilling to be one of his guests on the Parkinson show. Sir David Attenborough has also said Sir Michael went beyond region or class. He was just himself. He died at home surrounded by his family. GB News has delivered the Don't Kill Cash petition to Downing Street, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt taking delivery of almost 300,000 signatures from our presenters on behalf of viewers and listeners who've joined the campaign. The letter calls on the government to protect the status of cash as legal tender and a widely accepted form of payment until at least 2050. Around 73,000 fewer A's or A stars have been awarded this year to students compared to last year as part of a plan to return grades to pre-pandemic levels. Results in 2020 and 2021 were based on teacher assessments, and the number of students accepted for a place at university is also down by 2.6% from last year. The chief of UCAS says the rising cost of living is among the factors impacting education, with more students seeking part-time employment. And as you've been hearing, the Saudi Crown Prince has reportedly been asked to visit the UK. Rishi Sunak and Mohammed bin Salman spoke earlier today, we understand, to discuss trade, investment, defence and security cooperation. The Saudi Crown Prince has been accused of ordering the assassination of the Washington Post writer Jamal Khashoggi at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in 2018, a charge he's denied. The Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner says it's important that Britain holds the Saudis to account.
It's important as part of that visit that the Prime Minister speaks to him about the human rights and the issues. We have really deep concerns about that. But you also have to have dialogue. So it's important that, whilst he's over here, that there is dialogue there and that we do challenge, part of our role internationally is to challenge other nations as well and countries and say, look, this is not what we accept and this is not how you do things, and to try and influence in that way.
GB News can reveal that 80 migrants are currently being housed at a former RAF base in Essex. That's more than a month after the first group of migrants arrived there. The Wethersfield base near Braintree in Essex is eventually meant to house up to 1,700 people. The Home Office is saying there will be a gradual increase in numbers admitted, but sources close to plans suggest the pace will be significantly slower than was first envisioned. The site has had reports of disease amongst the first group of migrants, and there are problems with utilities working properly. GB News can reveal 550 people crossed the English Channel in 10 small boats this morning, and over the last 24 hours it brings the number of migrants who've now made that journey this year to more than 17,500. UK Border Force say they're on red alert during what they're describing as an extremely busy time for asylum seekers to cross the English Channel, and a significant surge in crossings is expected this weekend as weather conditions improve. In the United States, a woman from Texas has been charged with threatening to kill a federal judge in one of the cases against the former president, Donald Trump. District Judge Tanya Chutkan was the alleged victim of the threat and a racist comment, according to court records. The woman's said to have contacted the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. by telephone. Judge Chutkan is overseeing one of the court cases involving Trump's alleged attempt to overturn the 2020 US election. Now, thousands of people have had to be evacuated from their homes on the Spanish island of Tenerife as wildfires continue to spread. The fire is now 19 square miles wide, destroying dry woodland in a mountainous national park and a volcano on Spain's highest peak. And that is hampering access to the area. Some 250 firefighters have been sent to the scene, backed up by firefighting planes and helicopters, which have also been deployed. And thousands of Canadians have been evacuated from parts of the Northwest Territories, including the provincial capital Yellowknife, because of wildfires there too. Canada is enduring its worst wildfire season, with more than 1,000 active fires burning across the country, 230 of those in the remote Northwest Territories. That's the news. You're with GB News across the UK on your TV, in your car, on your digital radio, and now on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Thanks for that, Polly. Well, I'm Michelle Dubry, and I'm keeping you company right through till 7 o'clock tonight. The historian and broadcaster David Starkey alongside me, as is the author and academic Frank Furedi. Good evening, gentlemen. You're kind of semi-colour coordinating tonight. Was that planned?
Absolutely. I called him up and I said, what are you wearing this morning?
Did you?
Being totally vain, not.
I didn't get the memo. They didn't call me, everybody, did they?
Look, a much more distinguished shade, much subtler.
I'm saying nothing.
Frank clearly is just off the peg.
Well, I'm all right, off the peg, apparently. Well, you make of it what you will. A good peg, yeah, an expensive peg. There you go. Right, you know the drill, don't you, on Jubes & Co? Get in touch with us. Let me know your thoughts on everything tonight, whatever is on your mind. GBViews at gbnews.com, or you can tweet me at GBnews. Now, of course, let's just kick off the show. We can't kick it off any other way, can we, perhaps? Other than reflecting on the British broadcasting legend you've just been hearing in the headlines there, Sir Michael Parkinson. Parky, of course, he's died very sadly after a brief illness. I mean, pretty much everyone, we all know who he is, loved him, Yorkshire man through and through. Some fantastic moments. You've been seeing some of them already. Let's just reflect on another.
Lunatic. It's not.
Oh, a man with a puppet. Life was so much simpler in those days, wasn't he? Many people feeling very sad today. 88, a great innings, a man that achieved a huge amount in his life. Frank, what do you feel?
I know, I agree. The thing that kind of came to my mind was that in those days, come Monday morning, everybody would talk about this one show, everybody would talk about him. And in those days, it was still possible for the entire nation to have a common conversation about an individual like him, whereas today it's so fragmented and so polarized. But the thing that I remember about him were his wonderful interviews with George Best, who's one of my heroes. And the idea that you have this kind of big-mouth footballer being interviewed by a much more sort of a gentleman-like individual was such a nice contrast, and they worked so well together. I mean, there was genuine affection there, which transmitted itself to everybody watching it. It's something that, to me, was the most precious memory of his reign on television.
Yeah, true. David?
I didn't know Parkinson, but I knew well Russell Harty, who was, for a long period of time, his great rival. And we mustn't take these people too seriously. They weren't taken terribly. They're just television like us. And they weren't taken terribly seriously at the time. And the notion, indeed, in those days that you'd have actually given them a knighthood was preposterous. I remember the wonderful moment does Clive James, you will remember Clive James, he wrote this marvellous satire on the 1960s when I was very much functioning in the early 70s, and it was called The Adventures of Felicity Fark. And I'm afraid you can substitute other vowels in that in the land of the media.
Yeah,
and it had this marvellous moment in which Russell Harty and Michael Parkinson were reduced to interviewing each other's mothers. And, you know, we mustn't take it too seriously. It's only TV, but I think Frank's made one important point, the sense that because there were so few channels, this supplied a point of unity and conversation. But look again at the scene we just saw there. Can you imagine?
You won't get away with it in this day and age.
Exactly. And Michael was relatively, dare I say, straight. Well, he was very straight indeed. Russell was immensely, outrageously camp, though of course not frankly homosexual. And what was going on then wasn't simply this one conversation, it was a constant pushing of boundaries. What we see now is a constant closing down, when even the Edinburgh Fringe has turned puritanical. They were the anti-Puritans.
Well, as
they
I said,
were the breakers of barriers.
Life was a lot simpler
No, it wasn't
in
simpler.
those days.
We were making it more complicated.
But
what people are trying to do now is to make it simple.
The thing about what they were doing, which we're really missing, is that spontaneous interaction.
Yes.
Where
It was genuine in live TV.
You were kind of making it up as you went along.
Totally.
And you sensed that there was something, a dynamic there, which you could not predict in advance.
Well, I've got to say, in case you're considering it, don't jump on me, gents, with a hand puppet. I'd find it very odd, I've got to say.
It would do terrible things to your hair and
I
makeup.
know. Well, Sean has been in touch saying our family watch Parky every single week. It was a one-off treasure, and that is the point that Frank was just making there. People did gather around. That's the heart of it. But a life well lived, 88 years, as I said. He was a keen cricket lover as well. It is a very, very good innings to him. Right, I have to say, if you're a keen viewer of GB News, you will be familiar perhaps with our Don't Kill Cash campaign, something we feel very passionately about here on this channel. You know, in society, we're all different people with different choices. If you want to pay by your debit card, if you want to pay online, good, brilliant. But if you also choose to pay by cash, we feel very passionately that you should be able to do so. So, with the help of all of you guys at home, almost 300,000 of you to be precise, we're trying very hard, and we're not going to stop trying to make the government sit up and listen. We handed a petition into Downing Street today. There we all are, gathered around number 11, the door, and, you know, we're going to keep fighting for this, Frank. What do you feel about this notion that cash is disappearing? Businesses proudly declare we are a cashless zone.
Well, you know, money and credit cards are not kind of equivalents, either physical or moral equivalents, because when I use money, when I use cash, I'm pretty much an anonymous individual. I can make decisions about where I buy stuff, what I buy. Nobody knows how I spend my money. Whereas once you rely on credit cards, then you really are in the hands of these big companies who can both keep an eye on you, but even more importantly, who have this phenomenal amount of degree of control over your everyday life. And I don't know if you ever had the experience when you try to use a credit card and it was rejected because somebody in the credit card company made a mistake. Imagine if...
or you're skint.
Or you're skint. Imagine if your entire life is dependent on this credit card, what a lot of problem that creates. But worse still, imagine what it does to elderly people. Imagine what it does to people who are maybe a little bit illiterate when it comes to using digital technology. And I've seen, just a couple of days ago, an old lady literally crying because she couldn't get the right kind of numbers in using her credit card at the co-op. And those kinds of experiences are going to become more and more prominent. And we know already from the experience of Sweden, where they tried this horrible experiment, that it does cause a lot of grief for a lot of people in our society. So a great campaign. I fully supported it. And I do think we need to allow people to have more freedom making choices about how they spend their money.
Do you agree, David?
Yes, I mean, of course, in principle, I agree with every single word that Frank said. In practice, I try and avoid carrying cash as much as possible. It's a nuisance. I hate change. The simplicity of using the card is overwhelming. And, of course, it's also true the other way around. And again, we need to look at the practical implications of this. Remember, one of the reasons that shops are so keen to do this, they eliminate risk. They eliminate the risk of carrying cash, the risk of robbery. They eliminate the trouble of taking it to a bank because, of course, there's no longer a neighbourhood bank. There's no longer an easy way of getting rid of the cash. So it's part, I'm afraid, of what I think is an irreversible movement towards effectively a faceless, remote, electronically enabled society. And I'm sorry, we're going to have to get used to it.
Well, I don't agree with that, because I think there's too many things in society.
Sorry, again, I've conceded the point. Everything Frank said was right.
No, I'm
but
saying
are
to
not
you.
all the pressures overwhelming? I'm sorry, a little petition to Downing Street with an obscure station, which we are, making weepy noises on the steps of number 11 isn't going to change.
But I disagree with your
international
fundamental
pressure.
point, which is what you're saying is that essentially this is changing, so we just have to accept with it. I don't share that view. I think that what happened was during COVID, people used COVID as an excuse to try and ease in these cashless environments. They started making all ridiculous excuses such as, oh, it was touching things, it was touching cash. It wasn't that at all. And now what I think is actually happening is that we're moving more and more towards digital currencies, particularly centrally controlled digital currencies. And I reject that. And actually, I don't share that notion of saying, oh, well, it's inevitable, so let's just sit there. It doesn't matter to me whether, yes, we're not, we're not whatever.
Do you really do you have time to go into a supermarket and find out where your favourite processed peas are? Because I don't eat processed peas, by the way. But the sheer convenience, of online is why it's triumphant.
But you're
what if
being a little
someone's
bit
making a
cynical.
different choice? If someone's making a choice to pay by cash, and this is what we're pushing back against, if you want the convenience of not having to look for your processed peas, then good for you. But if somebody wants to pay with their cash, what we're pushing back on is saying that person should have a choice, and I reject the notion. We reject
Can
the
I
notion
then
that
give
it's
you
a done
another
deal.
argument? That person will have to pay more.
Why?
Because that transaction is now much more expensive. It's much more expensive in terms of personnel, it's expensive in terms of security, it's expensive in terms of accounting. Now, we are going to have to face this.
That shouldn't be the case.
The real world, the old world that you want to preserve, I'm afraid it's going to be a bit like a series of historic monuments.
Why do you assume that you have to live in a world where there's only one regime for these kinds of transactions? And what do you assume?
I've just said you've got to recognise that one will be more expensive than the other.
But not necessarily. Why should we exclude a lot of people who find it almost impossible to use digital technology?
Why do we charge them more, I'm afraid, to have a coin-operated meter? Because it's more expensive to run.
At the moment, credit cards are more expensive. So for most shops, when you use a credit card, they pay a premium on the credit card
but
in the way they don't for
it's
cash
still
transactions.
cheaper for them because they don't have the machinery of dealing with cash.
There's a flaw in your argument,
I'm sorry,
David.
Frank, they are not shifting. They're not shifting to a cashless society for our convenience. They're shifting to it from theirs.
Absolutely, but we have got to stand up for our convenience.
Yes,
And
we
it's-
are
As long as you're prepared to pay more for your primitive... I'm sorry, I'm the historian. For your primitive historicist instincts,
But
you've just got to pay
there's a
more.
flaw in your argument, because if what you're saying is that the retailer is going to pass on the cost of sale to the consumer, so therefore you transacting in cash should pay more, that doesn't stand up to me, because if the cost of sale is less, so i.e. you're sacking all your checkout people like what I was, and you're replacing those people with technology, so therefore you've got a reduction in your cost of sale. You're not passing that on. You're not giving people a reduction in their prices, because all of a sudden you've got these cost savings of laying half your workforce off. So if you don't pass it on that way, then I think you should absolutely fundamentally reject
Have you ever
passing it
looked
on
at the
other way.
relationship between the interest that banks charge and the interest that banks pay?
Oh, don't
There's
even
the
get me.
answer.
Don't even get me started on that one. There you go. We're off to a flying start. What do you make to this whole cash conversation? If you do want to keep your cash, would you be prepared to pay more? Maybe you would. I don't know. You get in touch and tell me. Up next after the break, qualifications, education. How important is all of this stuff when it comes to life generally in this country? It's A-level results day today.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it. Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, keeping you company until 7 o'clock tonight. The historian and broadcaster David Stark here alongside me, as is the author and academic Frank Furedi. Lots of people getting in touch saying, I've always agreed with everything that David says. That's a tall order there. He says, but when it comes to cash and the views there, my view says that you're absolutely wrong, David. Dividing opinion, I have to say, when it comes to whether or not cash is king, and if you do worship at the altar of the pennies, should you have to pay more to transact when it comes to buying your goods? I say absolutely not. But what says you? Anyway, let's talk qualifications, shall we? It's A-level results day today. Now, loads of teenagers up and down the land will be getting all of their bits of paper, some of them feeling good, some of them feeling less good. And of course, this year has got the added complication because the way that grades are given out has basically gone back to how it used to be, apparently, before COVID. Anyway, the Education Secretary, she's been saying that, you know what, if you didn't get your grades that you want, don't worry about it, because in about a decade's time, no one will be asking you about your grades anyway. But never mind a decade's time, I'm asking, how important are qualifications if you just want to get on in life? Generally, keeping me company, as I mentioned, I've got David and Frank, but I've also got a new face. Look, I've squeezed him in here because
it's very tight. Look at the width.
It's a tight squeeze. What can I say? It's a tight squeeze. This is a man, Matt Fiddes, a very successful, self-made man, I have to say. He owns a chain of martial arts companies, self-made millionaire, so he is. But I want to start with you. You are an academic, Frank, so I suspect that you're going to think that qualifications, education are very important to today's society.
Well, they should be very important, but the trouble is that universities in particular have become overblown. We need to cut them down to size because there's far too many of them. Far too many people feel that they have to go to university, even though they're bored out of their skull. And I think that if something like 40% of the people in universities now were to do something else, everybody would benefit. The unions would be a better place. They would have a greater life because they're wasting their time sitting, doing something they don't really like. And I think the key thing for us to understand is that we need to have a new balance between academic learning and the credentials you get and the recognition you get for that, and at the same time understanding that what people do in the rest of the industry and the rest of the world is as important for society. We need to have really good plumbers, really good electricians, really good entrepreneurs. And many of these people do not need to have a piece of paper that tells the world that they're good at what they're doing. That's something that people discover through their experience. But getting that balance right is so important so that we have both, sort of great skills at our disposal, but also, good education.
David?
Yes, and I mean, so many. We should really. Can we just concentrate for the moment on the actual question? Does the A-level that you get today or yesterday, whatever it is, matter? For most people, it actually does. It will determine whether they can do what they want. And I think it's also something else which is very important. If you actually look, let's look at two groups. Let's look at immigrant groups. One of the reasons that Indians and Chinese of origin are doing, and some West Africans are doing astonishingly well in this country, and indeed Jews historically, is because they take education spectacularly seriously. And they're increasingly taking over whole professions of pharmacy, of medicine, of all sorts of things, and a very good thing too. On the other hand, there are other groups, white working-class boys and their families, that don't take education seriously, and they're progressively immiserating. So, in other words, let me just put this to the Education Secretary. She is actually deliberately attacking the notion of serious social mobility. If you are rich, if you are comfortable, if you've been to public school, if your family is prosperous and has wide connections, an internship, somebody that daddy knows, somebody that mummy goes writing with, can get you on. If you're like me, if you come from a council estate, and you're the first generation not simply to have gone to university, but in my case to secondary school, doing well in that exam opened a gate to me that would otherwise have been closed. I wouldn't be here but for the results that I got at A-level.
Well, Matt, let me bring you in.
Many people might think, what a pity you didn't fail, but that's an entirely separate question.
No, they love you. Matt, let me bring you in, because you don't have this pathway of academia, and you are a very, very successful martial arts guru, schools all over the place, self-made, multi-millionaire, business worth about £120 million. So, how...
Why didn't you look it?
Why?
Do you want me? I'm not going to change.
Ignore him. Ignore him.
Yeah.
Tell me, so you didn't follow that route. You didn't feel that was important to you.
I tried my best, Michelle, but the school system was just not for me. I think what you're saying, there's some truth to it. You mentioned pharmacy and stuff like that. If you want to be a doctor, an accountant, a lawyer...
A professional.
You're going to have A-levels, GCSEs, and go on that path. If you're going to want to make money and be an entrepreneur to employ people and offer opportunities, you do not need all those qualifications.
Unless you want to go into a big company.
Well, not necessarily, because most business schools, business university, if you go to a business degree, you're getting taught by a business lecturer who's educating you about business, who's never owned a business before. It'd be like to go into a swimming instructor who can't swim. It's deeply bizarre. So with me, I teach entrepreneurs now how to make money and scale money and invest in property, and what's good debt, what's bad debt, how to really grow and expand. And the exam side, and we have over 1,500 centres, and we don't look at qualifications. We look at ambition.
I ask you, when you look for someone, right, someone needs to grow one of my schools or take care of marketing or whatever, honestly, do you not pay attention to that person's qualifications?
No, I want to look at the determination, how polite they are, how respectful their ambition, what their goals are, where they want to be in life. Then I'll teach them where they need to be through the school of hard knocks and learning the right way. It just all needs updating. I mean, kids are being taught to draw dinosaurs and so on. There has to be an element of structure, otherwise kids aren't going to get up and so on. But
does literacy matter? Does the fact that they can read, write and count?
Well, you're...
I can't write.
No, come on. We're having a serious conversation. Yeah. Does literacy matter? Does the fact that they can speak clearly, write a clear sentence and do a bit of arithmetic?
They definitely need to be able to read, obviously. As far as handwriting...
Did you just say you can't write?
I can write to myself, Michelle, but no one else will understand it.
Yeah, because you're dyslexic.
We didn't have that word for it back then. I just wasn't very good at school, and they said I was right-handed, I turned out to be left-handed. It was too late, they couldn't do anything about it. So I could scribble to myself, but it's not to stop me.
Aren't you really an exception? You see, I think this is the problem, that we can come up with constant exceptions. Sorry, and I'm not being patronising.
No.
I'm one of those, exactly like Frank. I think our universities are overblown. I think the way we've academicised subjects at school is preposterous, and so on and so on. But you are one in many thousands. Frank and I are one in 1 or 200s. In other words, the path that we're talking about is the one which is quite generally available. You're a narrow gate. And to pretend otherwise, I think, is wrong and is misleading. You require much more active force and character to do what you did than what certainly we did to begin with. The fact that we've got on and become relatively famous, yes,
well, I can tell you, I've got a little boy, and if my son has a fraction, because I want my son, I don't care about qualifications per se. I think it's about character, it's about get up and go, it's about confidence, it's about, wheeling and dealing and hustling, and that's what I want my son to develop and to gain. And if he gets some qualifications along the way, brilliant.
Is Alan Sugar really your ideal?
My ideal what?
Person. Do you really want that? Do you really want your child to grow up like that?
If my child...
aren't you offering... I mean, the classic image... I don't know where you were talking. The classic image of the entrepreneur
I was going to say, get out of the way, but he's a black belt, so I better not shove him. You ask me a question and then you don't let me answer. You just said to me, is Alan Sugar my ideal man? Well, I don't want to go on a date and marry the guy. No, I don't. But when I look at this person, Alan Sugar, I have deep admiration for him. I think what he's achieved in life from his start...
He's a phony and a fraud who destroyed British computing.
Don't be ridiculous.
No, this is true. Yeah, being genuinely serious, his mishandling of Amstrad is one of the reasons that we do not have an homegrown computing
industry. That's not the point.
Well, I don't know how we've gone on this random tangent, but I do need to say...
No, the point is that we need people who can get up in the morning, who are strong-willed, who are reliable, and it doesn't matter whether they have a piece of paper or not.
Well, look, just to be clear, we can't go around calling people frauds when they're not here to defend themselves. I have directly worked with and for Alan Sugar, and I personally have deep admiration for the guy. Anyway, I just want to end with you, because there will be people, and they've got kids, grandkids, that haven't got the results and the grades that they want today, and they'll be devastated. They will feel like their life is over. What would you say to them?
I've been getting messages all day, but I run a kids' organisation. Naturally, that happens. It doesn't mean anything at all. In fact, the people who are going to employ all these people with A-levels are going to be entrepreneurs like myself, who open up these businesses, taking these risks. Most of my multi-millionaire, billionaire friends are people with no qualifications. That's the fact. That is a proven fact. They didn't do well at school. There was some pain point at their childhood which made them go off and do really well. So it's entrepreneurs that create the opportunities for these people with A-levels. But you can do anything you want as long as you believe it, dream it and achieve it. And they should use it to motivate themselves to go back there and look for alternative ways.
Well, there you go. If your kids, grandkids or whatever have failed, you can clip that up, you can play it to them later. It's getting hot in here. What is the weather doing outside?
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McKibben here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. We'll notice the increased humidity during the next few nights. Windy and cloudy conditions starting to appear as well, and an increased risk of showers and thunderstorms as the weekend approaches. High pressure moving away, lower pressure approaching, isobars tightening, the wind picks up overnight. That window is bringing higher humidities across the UK, an increase in the cloud as well, some showers affecting eastern parts of Britain, but heavier downpours arriving by the end of the night across Northern Ireland, Wales into central and southern England. And it's a muggy night for sleeping, 17, 18 Celsius in the south, 13 to 15 Celsius in the north. Those winds of concern, especially across parts of northwest Wales as we go through Friday. 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts, perhaps more in some of the gustier spots, could impact travel, tourism and so on. And heavy showers, even some thunderstorms across parts of central and southern England during Friday morning. Frequent lightning, heavy rainfall as well. They diminish into the afternoon. It's a warm and humid day, but a lot of cloud and that breeze will limit temperatures. Then on Friday night, so that's when a lot of action takes place. Heavy rain sweeping through, risk of some very lively thunderstorms in the east of England. And the persistent rain on Saturday continues into the north of Scotland, Northern Ireland, and some, well, heavy rain at times throughout the weekend across northern parts of the UK. Further south, it's sunny spells and showers and still staying quite warm.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers.
proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
There you go, Downspeed in touch saying, Michelle, what a fantastic sight at the start of your programme, seeing the GB News squad on Downing Street. He says, what a sight that would be if we were in office. Can you imagine? He said he would like Nigel to be the Prime Minister. Michelle, how about you as the Home Secretary? I'll leave you to have sweet dreams about that one. I'm not sure it's going to happen anytime soon. Ian says there's far too many people doing low-value work degrees, which will get them into massive debt with probably no useful career at the end of the course. He says apprenticeships would be far better for so many young people. I agree with you, but I do think there is a bit of a snobbery, intellectual snobbery sometimes, when it comes to putting your kids into the apprenticeship route. Alan says Frank is totally correct about our education system. I have very successful friends who have never stepped foot into a university. Universities are indoctrination camps, says Carol. If you want to achieve anything in life, you can just do it on your own steam. Well, there you go. I want to talk to you up next about unpaid carers. Are you one of them? Do you use one of them? Do you think these people should be paid essentially a wage? Your thoughts?
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
You love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry. Till 7, the historian and broadcaster David Starkey alongside me, as is the author and academic Frank Furedi. Now, did you know that there is about, well, over actually, 10 million people apparently in this country that are essentially unpaid carers? They are busy looking after their loved ones. Well, there's been conversations now, because a lot of these people are really taking a financial hit. There's conversations about whether or not, Frank, these people should essentially be paid a proper wage. Yes, there's something, the carers allowance about 70-odd quid a week, but beyond that, You know, you're saving the taxpayer a lot of money. Should it be essentially a salaried job to care for your loved one?
Well, I'm going to be very unpopular, but I really think that even the very use of the term unpaid carer, I think is highly dubious, because when you care for somebody, it's really about a relationship. It's not about a transaction. You know, when I looked after my mother when she was very, very ill and working at the same time, the issue for me wasn't how much money I would get for that, but it was about my love for her and the way I would express that. And also the fact that we live in a world where, whether we like it or not, we have elderly relatives, elderly parents. People need to look after them, and this is part of life. It might be grim that you're not going to be able to work, or it might be grim that, for example, you feel that you're economically disadvantaged by that. But if we turn what is a fundamental human relationship into a cash transaction, then what we're doing is we're further eroding the bonds that kind of tie us together.
But how do you support it? That's all well and good if you've got savings or whatever, but if you don't have savings, how do you literally keep your head above water?
Well, you raise a very important question, and I think the way around that is to make sure that the allowances that people get, if, for example, they're not able to work because they have to look after a disabled relative, is sufficient to make their ends meet. But it shouldn't be a wage, it shouldn't be a salary. It should be something, a welfare resource that allows people under those circumstances to survive and to carry on with life. But I think it is just really, really quite important that caring is seen as something we do as part of our human existence.
An extension of love and not a capital transaction. David?
Yes, I mean, let me begin by being brutal, and then I'll come back to the kind of points that Frank has been making. The brutal truth is that we have an exchequer which is collapsing under the burdens we're putting on it. We cannot possibly take on more responsibilities. The state cannot assume any more responsibility. And one of the reasons that this is where I shift gear, one of the reasons that the British state has to take on so much responsibility is that in comparison with many other countries, Ireland, Italy, France, most of the Mediterranean world, the Southeast Asia and whatever, our family structures are very weak. We tend to see looking after the elderly as a bore and a chore. We're very keen to inherit their houses. We pack them off into care homes as quickly as possible and complain if we have to pay for it, or complain if the amount that you get from the house is diminished. Our weak family structures have also advantages. One of the reasons that capitalism and whatever develop in the Anglo-Saxon world is precisely our fierce individualism. But the downside, I'm afraid, is weak family structures. And the point is, Frank, and you're the sociologist, I'm not. One of the reasons that welfare payments are so huge in Anglo-Saxon society in Britain is precisely because our family is so weak and people refuse to assume the responsibility that you're talking about. Is that not right?
Yes, but and exactly, and I would argue that if you commercialize caring even more, then that will weaken the family far more thoroughly than is the case at the moment.
Can we then just turn the debate round, Michelle? What we should surely be talking about is not, as it were, paying carers. We should be talking about how do we actually reinforce the broader family unit? Wow. How do we... You see, this seems to me to be the absolutely central point. We've done everything in terms of tax, in terms of how you tax married couples, to separate the family unit, to stop people seeing it.
Well, there you go. That is a fantastic debate, I think. Certainly one that needs slightly more time than I've got left on the end of the programme, but we can do that another day. How do we reinforce the family unit, the family structures? Do you think we de-incentivise them in this country or not? I'll tell you people that perhaps should be de-incentivised. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, apparently Rishi Sunak, inviting him to this country, some saying that he's going to roll out the red carpet. Should we be doing for a country that has quite dubious regimes? You tell me.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, Michelle Dewberry till 7 alongside me, historian and broadcaster David Starkey and the author and academic Frank Furedi. We've just been talking about whether or not carers in the home should essentially be paid a wage. Dividing opinion on this one, I can tell you Larry feels very strongly that basically he says it's a terrible idea, essentially open to too much abuse. Diane says anyone that thinks it shouldn't be paid should try doing it for 1 week and see whether or not they change their view. Rachel is an unpaid carer. She says it's not just about money. Perhaps if places give better concessions to carers, she says that might help make life a little bit easier for people too. Now, Rishi Sunak in trouble again today when he's not, quite frankly. Anyway, apparently this time it's because it looks likely that he is going to be, what some are saying, rolling out the red carpet to the Saudi Crown Prince. Of course, the reason that this is potentially controversial is because the human rights record, etc., in Saudi Arabia, Frank, is less than desirable, to put it mildly. And some people are saying that we shouldn't be entertaining the Crown Prince at all. Where are you on it?
I think we should. I think that realpolitik and moralism do not mix well. Britain's got a strategic interest in maintaining good relations with Saudi Arabia. That doesn't mean to say we have to welcome them or pretend that Saudi Arabia is anything but what it really is, and where there's no real human rights, which is a fairly despotic state. But you have to remember there are many, many countries in this world that we have to live with that have a human rights record that's just as bad as Saudi Arabia. And we can't really sort of declare that we are morally living in a distinct island that doesn't deal with the real world. And what I'm really worried about is whenever diplomacy gets subjected to a moralistic agenda, because if we do that, then we lose sight of our national interest. And I think that our national interest, from a moral point of view, must prevail over any other sentiment, because if we want to get ahead in the world and compete and look after our security, particularly in the case of Saudi Arabia, have access to crucially important energy resources. We have no choice but to allow this person to come here. It doesn't mean that we have to welcome that individual or pretend that everything is rosy and put out the red carpet. It simply means that we have to be pragmatic and live in the real world.
Do you agree, David?
Yes and no. The trouble is we are wildly inconsistent, aren't we? And, of course, it won't be simply that the Prince will be in Downing Street. I imagine the Prince will be in Buckingham Palace. Do you remember Prince Charles waxing eloquent on those hideous old waxworks of the Chinese leadership and refusing to shake their hands and, indeed, absenting himself from public events because he thought they were so wicked? He will be, I'm afraid, all over the Crown Prince because there are very close relationships between the royal families and between not only the royal family of Saudi Arabia, but all the Gulf states, none of which have got any better human rights records than Saudi Arabia. Do you see what I mean? What the problem is, there's wild inconsistency, and we lurch from one position to another, and we do it without really thinking and without strategic thought. What I think is disgraceful, Frank, I mean, you was putting forward the kind of views that, a hard-nosed 19th century foreign secretary would have done. There is a thing called the national interest. We have no friends, we only have interests. When did we ever do that? We lurch around on human rights, we strike postures over energy, we do all of these things, and then suddenly we discover we actually need somebody. It's the chaos of our policy. It's our refusal to think straight.
What you're describing is geopolitical illiteracy, which we have at the moment.
Yeah.
Sometimes we think we're social workers to the rest of the world, but that's a problem because I think the British people need to understand that we live in a very difficult world, and we need to look after our interest in a clearly single-minded kind of a way, and therefore not play this silly game.
You speak as a Hungarian by extraction.
Well,
no, I'm being really serious. Sorry, I'm being serious. I'm being frank. I'm not mocking. I am being desperately serious. Our problem is, of course, we have been sold a myth. We have been sold the myth that human rights are now a universal assumption, that everybody signs up to the UN, everybody believes in the Universal Charter of Human Rights. I'm afraid we should have learned from the response in the Ukraine. The West is not supported by anybody outside the West. Our former dependencies like South Africa and India, non-dependencies like Brazil, all either observed sweet little neutrality or lean to Russia.
Final word to you on that, Frank?
And I think the key thing is to understand that we need to take our nation seriously, take our national interests seriously, and that's got to be the starting point from which we make all these decisions about the rest of the world.
So damn human rights.
National interest should come first.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that? When we're having this conversation, I've got this image. I know it's separate. It's separate, but it's linked. I've got this image of this big inflatable Donald Trump in a nappy. I remember when there was conversations about Donald Trump potentially having that state visit, and people, because they were so opposed to some of his...
The Mayor of London, remember?
Yes, they were so
the Mayor of London inflating the thing,
I don't know if he inflated it, but I think obviously he certainly gave permission for it to be flown over this country. So there are very different lines that people have in terms of what's acceptable and what is not. That is for sure. But where do you stand on it? Do you think that we should be welcoming these people, just crack on with it in terms of, I don't know, just the goodness of the country going forward in international relationships, or in terms of lines? Where would your line be? Lots of people enjoying the conversation tonight. Carol saying, what is all this conversation about the Saudis? They've been here for years, buying up football clubs and all the rest of it. Why now do we only just care? I shall leave you to ponder that. Look, time flies when you're having a good, fun conversation and a good, robust debate. David Starkey, I've enjoyed your company. Frank Furedi, yours too. More importantly, you guys at home as well. Thank you very much for getting involved in the conversation. Do not forget, the Don't Kill Cash campaign continues. If you haven't signed it, please do so. Nigel Farage is up next, so don't you go anywhere, and I'll see you tomorrow.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McKibben here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. We'll notice the increased humidity during the next few nights. Windy and cloudy conditions starting to appear as well, and an increased risk of